The platform was packed. It was 5:47 on a Thursday, and everyone was trying to get out of the city before the thunderstorms hit. I had my purse slung crossbody, black leather, heavy with my laptop and a book I never finished, and I was holding a Samsung Galaxy S24 in one hand, texting one of the kids about when I'd be home. That's when my best friend Lisa tripped. I felt her hand on my back, shoving forward with a kind of clumsy, deliberate force that I didn't understand until it was too late. My balance went. I pitched toward the yellow line, toward the tracks, and I caught myself on the edge of a pillar, scraped my palm raw, tore the sleeve of my blazer. My purse went over. I watched it disappear into the pit, still crossbody, still attached to nothing. Security was on Lisa before I could say anything. They didn't grab her arm, they grabbed her wrist, and one of them said, "You're the woman from the green line." They cuffed her against the wall while the train came in. People took out their phones. Nobody helped me. That was the thing. Nobody even asked if I was okay. I didn't know then that she was just a warm-up act. I know how this sounds. Like I'm making connections where there aren't any. Like I'm the kind of person who sees a pattern because she needs there to be one. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's always been true. But I'm telling you this the way it happened, and you can decide for yourself if I'm wrong. The call came in at 6:12 a.m. I was already awake, standing in the kitchen with a mug of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the window over the sink. The light outside was that gray blue you get before the sun's fully up, and the rain from the night before was still beating on the glass. I'd slept maybe 3 hours. That's how it was for me then. The house was quiet because the kids were both away at school, and David was still asleep, and I was the only person in the world who needed to be up at that hour. The phone buzzed against the granite countertop, and I picked it up without looking at the screen. Elena. The voice was a woman's. Young. Controlled. "I think you should know something." I didn't ask who she was. I should have. I didn't. "Your husband is a liar," she said. "And he's not going to leave you." "I want to." "He said he would, but I've been waiting for 3 years." I put the mug down. I was still looking at the window. A bird landed on the sill and then flew off. "Who is this? That doesn't matter. What matters is I'm tired of being the second choice. And I think you should be tired of being the wife who doesn't know." She hung up. I remember standing there for a long minute, holding the phone against my ear, listening to nothing. Then I went upstairs and got dressed and started the coffee again, fresh this time, and I didn't wake David. I was sitting at the kitchen island when he came down at 7:15, hair wet from the shower, tie half-tied. He kissed the back of my head like he always did. He smelled like soap and toothpaste. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." He poured himself a cup of coffee. He never asked why I couldn't sleep. He never asked if I'd gotten a phone call. He didn't know anything. And for a second I thought about telling him, just to see if he flinched. But I didn't. I sat there and watched him read the paper on his tablet, and I thought about how easy it was to sit next to someone and feel like you were alone. That was the first week. The week after the phone call, I started going through the mail. Not the usual stuff, the bills and the catalogs, but the things David brought in from the office and left in his study. Receipts. Credit card statements. I'd never done that before. I'd never needed to. We had a system. He handled the investments, I handled the household. That was the agreement. That was the trust. I found the first one on a Tuesday. It was folded into his briefcase, tucked into the side pocket, half crumpled like he'd meant to throw it away and forgot. A receipt for the Four Seasons. A bottle of wine, 2 entrees, a dessert. The date was October 14th, 2019. The amount was $237. I knew that date. I knew it because it was the date my mother died. I'd been at the hospital for 3 days straight, not sleeping, not eating, holding her hand while her breathing got slower and slower. I'd called David that night, called him 3 times, and he hadn't answered. His voicemail said he was in a meeting. His voicemail said he'd call back. He never did. I sat in a plastic chair in a hospital room and watched my mother die alone with only me there, and I thought about how I was supposed to be married to a man who would have come if he could. He didn't come because he was having dinner. At the Four Seasons. With someone else. 2 entrees. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't cry. I went to the grocery store and bought the things I needed for dinner, and I cooked that night like nothing had changed. I served it on the plates we got for our 10th anniversary. I asked him about his day. He talked about a case he was working on, a deposition that went well. He said he thought they had a good shot at settling. He smiled at me from across the table, and I smiled back, and I watched him chew his food, and I wondered if he ever tasted anything at all. The receipt went into the back of my nightstand drawer, under some old books I hadn't read in years. I didn't know then why I was keeping it. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. I thought maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the receipt was old. Maybe he'd had a client dinner. Maybe the 2 entrees were for a colleague, another lawyer, someone from his firm. I didn't believe it. But I wanted to. I wanted to so badly that I made myself wait. That weekend, David went to a football game with some friends from the office. He left on Saturday morning and said he'd be back by 9. I watched him drive off from the kitchen window, and then I walked into his study and started opening drawers. The study was his room. I didn't go in there much. He had a desk with a computer and a bookshelf full of law books and some framed photos of the kids. It smelled like him, that leather and cologne smell that used to make me feel safe. I didn't feel safe anymore. I felt like I was breaking into a stranger's house. The top drawer of his desk had pens and paper clips and old receipts for gas. The second drawer had a folder labeled insurance. I opened it and found policies for the house, the cars, some life insurance stuff. Nothing strange. The bottom drawer was locked. I didn't know he had a key. I didn't know where he kept it. I stood there for a second looking at that lock, and I thought about walking away. I thought about pretending I hadn't seen it. I thought about all the reasons a man might lock a drawer in his own study, all the innocent explanations. Then I remembered the 4 seasons. And the phone call. And the way he'd said, "You're up early," without asking why I was up early. I found the key in the back of his sock drawer. It was taped to the inside of a shoebox. I don't know why I knew to look there. I just did. I took the key and I opened the drawer, and I sat down on the floor of his study with my knees pulled up to my chest, and I went through every single piece of paper in that drawer. There were credit card statements going back 2 years. Bank statements from an account I'd never seen before. A folder with Diana's name on it, filled with photos and receipts and little notes written on sticky paper in David's handwriting. I recognized his handwriting. I'd read his grocery lists. I'd read the birthday cards he gave me. I knew the way he made his lowercase d's. That was the worst part. Seeing his handwriting on notes that said things like 8 p.m., the usual place, and thinking about you, and can't wait to see you tomorrow. I sat on the floor for a long time. The house was quiet. The clock on his desk ticked. I could hear the dishwasher running in the kitchen. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking. Everything in the world was still going on, and I was sitting on the floor of my husband's study with a folder full of proof that my marriage had been over for years. I didn't cry then either. I closed the folder and put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. I locked the drawer and put the key back in the shoebox, and I walked out of the study and closed the door behind me. I went to the living room and sat on the couch and stared at the wall. That night David came home at 9:15, 15 minutes late. He said the game went into overtime. He said he had a great time. He asked me what I'd done all day. Cleaned. I said, "House looks great," he said, and he kissed me on the forehead and went to take a shower. I sat on the couch and listened to the water run. I thought about all the times I'd sat on that same couch thinking we were happy. I thought about all the years I'd given to him. I thought about my mother, who had divorced my father when I was 12, and how she'd never remarried, and how she'd told me once that the worst thing about a bad marriage is that you don't recognize it until you're too deep to leave. I'd thought she was being dramatic. I'd thought she was projecting. I didn't think that anymore. The next week, I went to the bank. I told the teller I needed to open a new account in my name only. She asked if I wanted to transfer anything from the joint accounts. I said no. I told her I had a separate deposit to make. Then I went to a different bank and I opened a safe deposit box, and I put my mother's money in it. She'd left me $60,000 when she passed. I'd never touched it. I'd kept it in a mutual fund because David said we should let it grow. It grew. And then I took it out, all of it, and I put it in a box with a key that I kept around my neck. It seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like I was finally learning something. I also hired a lawyer. A woman named Barbara. I'd worked with her years ago, before the kids, back when I was a consultant. She specialized in family law and forensic accounting. I called her from my car in the grocery store parking lot, and I told her I needed to talk. She said to come by her office. I went that afternoon. Barbara's office was in a strip mall near the highway. It was small and cluttered, and she didn't offer me coffee. She sat me down in the chair across from her desk, and she said, "Tell me what's going on." I told her. Everything. The phone call. The receipt. The locked drawer. The folder. The account. I told her how much I thought he'd taken. I told her I'd taken photographs of every single page in that drawer. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look judgmental. She looked at me like I was a client she'd seen 100 times before, and she said, "Okay, here's what we do." She laid it out. We'd hire a forensic accountant to trace the transfers. We'd get an official valuation of the joint assets. We'd file for a legal separation, not a divorce, because that would give me time to get everything in order. We'd make sure David had no way to access the money I'd just moved. And then we'd present him with the evidence and the papers and let him decide how he wanted to play it. "You don't have to decide anything today," she said. "But you should know that the longer you wait, the harder it is to undo." I sat in that chair and I thought about how I had no idea who I was anymore. I was a woman who'd found her husband's affair folder and who'd taken photographs of it instead of confronting him. I was a woman who'd moved money into a safe deposit box and hired a lawyer. I was a woman who'd made coffee for a man who'd been having dinner with someone else on the night her mother died. I was a different person than I had been a month ago. "I want to do it," I said. "I want to do it the right way." Barbara nodded. She handed me a card with a forensic accountant's name on it. "Call him tomorrow." I went home and made dinner. Pasta. David said it was good. He said he liked the sauce. He said he was thinking of taking a vacation in a few months, maybe the Caribbean, just the two of us. He said we deserved a break. He said he'd been working too hard, and he wanted to spend more time with me. I looked at him across the table, and I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man sitting across from me was the man I'd married. I wanted to believe that everything in that drawer was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a series of events that had an innocent explanation I just hadn't found yet. But I'd seen the photographs. I'd seen the notes. And I didn't believe any of it. "I think that's a great idea," I said. "We should definitely take a trip." He smiled. I smiled. We had dessert. I was starting to learn that nothing I said had to mean what it used to mean. I called the forensic accountant the next morning. His name was Mark, and he had the kind of voice that sounded like he'd been doing this for 30 years, and nothing surprised him anymore. I told him what I needed, and he said he could have a preliminary report in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I thought about that. 2 weeks of sitting across from David at dinner. 2 weeks of pretending I didn't know what he'd done. 2 weeks of watching him smile at me and tell me he loved me. "I can't wait 2 weeks," I said. He said he understood, but forensic accounting took time. He'd need access to bank records, investment accounts, credit card histories. He'd need to trace every transfer David had made over the last 3 years. He'd need to figure out where the money had gone. 3 years, I said. Yes. That's the time frame I'd recommend. I didn't tell him I knew about Diana. I didn't tell him about the photos or the notes. I just gave him the account numbers I'd photographed from David's drawer and told him to start there. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions of being a wife. I made breakfast. I did laundry. I went to the grocery store. I answered the phone when the kids called and told them everything was fine. I sat in the living room at night and watched TV with David and listened to him talk about his day and nodded at the right moments. I didn't feel like I was lying. I felt like I was playing a role I'd been rehearsing for years. The first sign that something was shifting came on a Thursday. I was in the kitchen sorting through the mail, the usual stuff, when I found a small white envelope addressed to me. No return address. The handwriting was neat, careful, and I didn't recognize it. I opened it and found a photograph. David and a woman I'd never seen before, standing at a bar. She was young, thin, dark hair pulled back. He had his hand on her lower back. They were both laughing. The date in the corner of the photo was 5 months ago. I turned the photo over. On the back, in the same neat handwriting, it said, "He told me he'd leave you by the end of the year." That was 3 years ago. I stood there in my kitchen holding that photograph, and I felt something click into place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something colder. I folded the photo and put it in my pocket and went back to sorting the mail. That evening, I asked David about his day. He said it was fine. He said he'd had lunch with a colleague. He said he was thinking about getting a new car, something with more space. "I think we should get a new car," he said. "The one we have is getting old." "Sure," I said. "Whatever you think." He didn't notice. He never noticed. He'd been living in a world where I agreed with everything he said, and he'd stopped asking himself why. I went to the bank the next day and took out half of the remaining joint savings. I didn't ask permission. I didn't leave a note. I just walked in with my ID and my card, and I made the withdrawal. The teller asked if I wanted to transfer it to another account. I said no. I took it in cash, all of it, and I put it in a bag, and I walked out. 2 days later, David came home early. He had a look on his face I hadn't seen in years. The kind of look he used to get when something was wrong at work, when a case wasn't going his way, when he'd made a mistake. He found me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He stood in the doorway, and he didn't say anything. "Did you take money out of the joint account?" he asked. I kept chopping. "Which joint account?" "The one we both have. The one with the savings." I said. "That one." "Yes." I moved some money. He waited. I could feel him waiting. I could feel him trying to figure out the right thing to say. He was good at that, at knowing what to say. He'd always been good at it. That was why I'd married him. "Or where did you move it to? Somewhere safe?" I said. Elena. "I need to know." I stopped chopping and looked at him. He looked nervous. He looked like he wasn't sure what I was capable of. "David," I said, "how much do you think we have in that account?" He didn't answer right away. He blinked. He did that thing he did when he was calculating something in his head. "About 120,000, he said. About," I said. "Right. About?" He was lying, and I knew it. I'd seen the statements. I knew how much he'd taken. I knew there was less than 70,000 left. He'd moved the rest to Diana's accounts, to investments I'd never signed off on, to things I couldn't touch. "Actually," I said, "it's 68,000. Because you transferred the other 52 to accounts I don't have access to." "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" He didn't say anything. He didn't deny it. He just stood there in the doorway, his face pale, his hands at his sides. "Elena," he said, "there's something I need to tell you." "No," I said. "There isn't. There's nothing you need to tell me. I already know." I went back to chopping vegetables. He stood there for another minute. I didn't look at him. I just kept moving the knife through the carrots, through the celery, through the onions. I was crying, but I didn't make a sound. I was crying so quietly that I don't think he even noticed. David went upstairs, and I heard the door to his study close. I finished chopping the vegetables, and I made dinner, and I ate it alone. He didn't come back down. I didn't call him. I sat at the table with a plate of food I couldn't taste, and I thought about all the dinners I'd made for him, all the meals I'd cooked and served and cleaned up after, all the years I'd spent thinking that feeding someone was the same as loving them. The next morning, Barbara called. She said the forensic accountant had found more than we'd expected. There were accounts I hadn't seen in the drawer. Accounts in Diana's name. Accounts in David's name alone. There were transfers going back 4 years, not 3. Small amounts at first. Then bigger. Then much bigger. "How much total?" I asked. "Enough to rebuild a life," Barbara said. "But there's something else you should know. The woman you mentioned, Diana, she's not just an associate. She's been working with David on a case that's currently under federal investigation. There's a chance they're both involved in something illegal." I set the phone down. I had to set it down because my hands were shaking. "Are you telling me he's been moving money to cover something at his firm?" "I'm telling you we don't know yet. But we have to be careful. If this becomes a federal investigation, the dynamics shift. You might not be able to separate your assets from his if they're tied up in court." I didn't say anything for a long time. I was sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot. People were walking past with carts, loading groceries into trunks. The sun was out. Everything looked normal. But my whole life had just changed again. What do? I asked. Wait, she said. Don't do anything. Don't confront him. Don't move money. Don't do anything until we know more. I waited. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. David started working later. He said it was a big case, a complicated one, that he'd have to put in extra hours. I didn't ask questions. I didn't say anything. I watched him leave in the morning, and I watched him come back at night, and I thought about how he was spending his days with Diana. They were probably sitting in meetings together. They were probably having lunch. They were probably talking about me, about how stupid I was, about how they were going to get away with it. I started getting more anonymous messages. A photo of David and Diana at a restaurant. A photo of David's car parked in front of Diana's apartment building. A photo of them walking into the courthouse together, his hand on her arm, like he was guiding her. I didn't respond. I didn't even try to find out who was sending them. I just saved them all in a folder on my phone. The folder was called Insurance. It seemed fitting. One night, David came home at midnight. I was in the living room, still awake, reading a book I'd read 100 times before. He walked in and looked at me and said, "You're still up." Couldn't sleep. He sat down on the couch. He looked tired. He looked older. He looked like a man who was carrying a weight he'd never meant to pick up. "Elena," he said. "I think we need to talk." "Okay," I said. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About us. About our marriage. I know things haven't been perfect. I know I've been distant. I've been working a lot. And I think maybe we should take some time apart. Just to clear our heads." I closed my book. I set it on the arm of the chair. "Time apart," I said. "Just a few weeks. I could stay at the apartment near the office. We could see how it feels. How it feels." "I don't want to hurt you," he said. "That's the last thing I want. But I think we've both changed. I think we've been going through the motions for a long time, and maybe we need to be honest about it." "Honest," I said. "You want to be honest?" He looked at me. He had a face full of sincerity. He had a face that had been lying to me for years, and I'd believed every single word. "David," I said, "I know about the Four Seasons. I know about October 14th. I know about Diana. I know about the accounts. I know about the transfers. I know everything. I've known for a while now." He went white. I'd seen people go white before, but not like that. Not the way he did, sitting on my couch in the living room, still wearing his tie, still holding the briefcase he'd carried all day. "I've already hired a lawyer," I said. "I've already had a forensic accountant go through the finances. I've already opened my own accounts. I've already moved my mother's inheritance out of your reach. I know you're under federal investigation for that case you and Diana are working on. I know you've been moving money to cover something. I have all of it. I have everything. And I'm not giving you a single thing." He didn't speak. His mouth opened and closed, and no sound came out. He was a man who was used to winning in court, and he couldn't find a single word to say. "You wanted to take time apart," I said. "I think that's a great idea. I think you should go to the apartment tonight. And I think you should stay there until my lawyer tells me otherwise. If you come back, I'll call the police. If you threaten me, I'll call the police. If you try to take anything else from our accounts, I'll call the police. And I'll also call the federal prosecutor who's investigating your firm. Do you understand?" He didn't answer. He stood up. He walked to the door. He opened it, and he went out, and he closed it behind him. I sat on the couch. The house was quiet. The clock on the mantel ticked. I was shaking, but I didn't feel scared. I felt like I'd just done something I should have done years ago. I took my phone out of my pocket, and I opened the folder called Insurance, and I looked at all the photos one by one. Diana's face. David's face. Both of them together. All the evidence of everything they'd done to me. I closed the folder and called Barbara. "He's gone," I said. "Good," she said. "He knows I know. Better. He tried to tell me he wanted some time apart. He tried to pretend it was his idea." "Did you tell him everything?" I told him I had a lawyer. I told him about the forensic accountant. I didn't tell him about the photos. I kept those. "Good," she said again. "You're going to be fine, Elena. You're doing everything right." I hung up. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of wine. I sat at the table and I looked at the empty chair where David used to sit. I didn't miss him. I didn't miss the sound of his voice or the smell of his cologne or the way he used to kiss the back of my head. I'd been missing a version of him that had never existed. I finished my wine and went upstairs. I slept in the middle of the bed for the first time in years. I spread out my arms and I took up all the space, and I thought about how I'd been shrinking myself to fit into a life that was never going to hold me. I thought about Lisa, about the platform, about how she'd tried to push me onto the tracks and how I'd caught myself. I thought about all the people who'd watched her get handcuffed and hadn't helped me. I thought about how I'd never asked for help. I'd never needed it. I'd always been the one who caught herself. David didn't come back that night. He didn't call. I didn't expect him to. He was a lawyer and he knew when he'd lost a case. He was already figuring out how to salvage what he could, how to protect himself. But I'd taken away his options. I'd taken his money, his secrets, his leverage. There was nothing left for him to salvage but himself. The next morning, I woke up at 6. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen island and looked out the window at the backyard. The rain from the day before had cleared and the sun was just starting to come up. It was the same gray-blue light I'd seen a month ago when I'd gotten the phone call. Everything had changed and nothing had changed. I was still in the same house, still in the same kitchen, still wearing the same old robe I'd worn for years. But I wasn't the same person. I'd never be that person again. Barbara called at 8. She said the forensic accountant had confirmed everything. David had transferred over $200,000 out of joint accounts over the last 4 years. Most of it had gone into accounts in Diana's name. Some had gone into accounts David had opened without my signature. It was all traceable. It was all documented. She said we could file the separation papers as soon as I was ready. Do it, I said. File them today. You don't want to wait to see what he does? No, I said. I've waited long enough. She said she'd have the papers filed by the afternoon. I hung up and went to take a shower. I stood under the hot water for a long time, longer than I needed to, and I let the water run over my face. I didn't think about David. I didn't think about Diana. I thought about my mother, about the letters she'd written and never sent, about how she'd stayed in a bad marriage for years, and how she'd finally left. I thought about how I'd always told myself I was different, that I'd never end up like her. And then I'd ended up exactly like her, only worse, because I'd stayed longer and I'd let him take more. I got dressed. I made breakfast. I ate it alone. I sat at the table and looked at the empty chair, and I didn't feel sad. I felt free. I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to be light. And now I was light. Now I was standing at the edge of a life I could choose. When the doorbell rang, I didn't jump. I walked slowly to the front door and I opened it, and I found a courier standing there with a large envelope. He handed it to me and I signed for it and I closed the door. I opened the envelope in the hallway. It was a copy of the separation papers. Barbara had filed them. He'd be served by the end of the week. I stood in the hallway with those papers in my hands, and I knew something I hadn't known before. I knew that I was going to be fine. I was going to be more than fine. I was going to be the person I should have been all along. Someone who didn't wait. Someone who didn't hope for better. Someone who made better herself. I knew it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. And I was ready for it. I'd been ready all along. The papers were served on Friday. I know this because Barbara called me at 3:47 in the afternoon to tell me that David had signed for them at his office. She said he'd looked shocked. She said he'd asked to speak to me. She said he'd called her names I won't repeat. He wants to know why you didn't give him a chance to explain, she said. Explain what? That's what I asked him. He didn't have an answer. I hung up and went back to what I was doing. I was cleaning out the study. David's study. I'd waited until the papers were served, and then I'd gone in with trash bags and a box for donations. I didn't want his things in my house anymore. I didn't want to look at the chair where he sat and typed his lies. I didn't want to open his drawers and find his handwriting. I started with the books. Law books, mostly. Heavy, boring, the kind of books that smell like old paper and dust. I stacked them in the box and I carried them out to the garage. Then I went back for the files. His work files. I didn't open them. I didn't want to know. I just put them in a separate box, the one I'd marked David, and I set it aside for him to pick up. The locked drawer was still locked. I had the key. I'd kept it. I opened the drawer and I took out everything that was still in there, the remaining financial statements, some personal notes, a photograph of Diana that had been tucked inside a folder. I looked at the photograph. She was younger than I thought. She looked like the kind of girl who was used to getting what she wanted. She had a smile that said she'd never been told no. I put the photograph in the box with the rest of his things. I didn't keep it. I didn't want it. I didn't want any reminders of her face. The last thing I found was a ring. David's wedding ring. He'd left it in the top drawer, tucked into a small velvet pouch. I didn't know he'd stopped wearing it. I hadn't noticed. I must not have looked at his hands for a long time. I held the ring in my palm for a second. It was heavy. Gold. The same ring I'd put on his finger 19 years ago, in a courthouse with our families watching. I'd been so sure we'd be together forever. I dropped it in the box. The doorbell rang while I was still in the study. I wiped my hands on my jeans and went to answer it. David was standing on the front steps. He looked thinner. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit him the way it used to. I got your papers, he said. I know. Can I come in? No. He stood there. He didn't move. I stood in the doorway with my arms crossed, and I watched him try to figure out his next move. I'd seen him do that 1,000 times in court. He was good at it. He was good at reading people and adjusting his strategy. But I wasn't a jury. I wasn't a judge. I was his wife, and I was done playing the role. Elena, he said. Please. Please what? Please let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I have the documents. I have the statements. I have the receipts. I have the photographs. I have everything. His face changed. Something shifted. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. What photographs? I didn't answer. I just stood there and let him wonder. I let him feel what it felt like to be the one who didn't know. There's something going on with the firm, he said. Something I didn't tell you about. It's not what you think. The money, some of it was for a client settlement. It's complicated. I can explain if you just give me a chance. You moved over $200,000 into accounts I didn't know existed. You've been having an affair for 4 years. You were at the Four Seasons on the night my mother died. There's no explanation that makes that okay. I know, he said. I know that. But you didn't mean to what? Not be there, not answer the phone, not tell me the truth. What did you mean to do? David, he didn't have an answer. He never had an answer. He was a man who'd spent his whole life talking his way out of things, and he'd run out of words. I'm going to ask you to leave, I said. I'm going to ask you to leave and not come back. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem. I closed the door. I locked it. I leaned my forehead against the wood and I breathed. I didn't cry. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like I'd just done something hard and important, and I was proud of myself. He didn't knock again. I heard his footsteps on the porch. I heard his car start. I heard him drive away. I went back to the study and finished cleaning it out. I took down the photographs of us. I took down the diplomas and the awards. I packed everything into boxes and I carried them to the garage. By the time I was done, the room was empty. No books. No files. No ring. Nothing left but the desk and the chair and the empty shelves. I stood in the middle of the room and I looked at it. It was just a room. It wasn't his room anymore. It wasn't the room where he'd sat and planned his escape. It was a blank space. A room where I could put anything I wanted. That night, the anonymous messages started again. A photo of David's car parked in front of Diana's apartment. A photo of the two of them standing in a hallway. A photo of them talking outside a courtroom. I didn't save these. I deleted them. I didn't need to see them. I already knew what they were doing. I didn't respond. I didn't ask who was sending them. I knew who it was. It was Diana. She was trying to hurt me, trying to make me feel small, trying to prove she'd won. But she didn't understand that I wasn't fighting for the same thing anymore. She wasn't a threat. She was a woman who'd spent 4 years waiting for a man who was never going to leave. I'd spent 4 years waiting too, and I'd stopped. She hadn't. The next week, Barbara filed the legal separation. It was official. David and I were no longer married in the eyes of the law. We were in a holding pattern, a limbo, waiting for the final divorce papers to be drawn up. But it was done. I was no longer his wife. I changed the locks on the house. I changed the passwords on every account. I called the kids and told them their father and I were separating. My daughter cried. My son was quiet. I expected that. They were in college. They'd grown up in a house where their parents didn't fight. They'd thought we were happy. I'd thought we were happy. I was the one who'd been wrong. My daughter called me back an hour later. She said David had called her. He'd told her the separation was mutual. He'd told her they'd both made mistakes. He'd told her he'd always love me. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. I didn't want to tell her the truth. Not yet. She'd find out on her own. The day after that, I was in the grocery store. I was pushing my cart down the aisle, looking for pasta, when I saw Diana. She was at the end of the aisle, holding a basket, looking at a shelf of cereal boxes. She hadn't seen me. I stopped and watched her for a second. She looked tired. She looked like she'd been crying. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing a sweatshirt that was too big for her. I didn't say anything. I turned around and pushed my cart in the other direction. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten to me. She hadn't. I was fine. I was better than fine. I was a woman who'd survived a shove and caught herself. But she saw me anyway. She called my name. I stopped. I turned around. She was standing behind me, her basket in her hands, her face flushed. Elena, she said. I need to talk to you. No, I said. Please. I know you don't owe me anything. But I need to tell you something. I don't want to hear it. He's been lying to both of us. I looked at her. She was crying. She was standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle with tears running down her face, and she didn't care who saw. He told me he was going to leave you, she said. He told me that 3 years ago. He told me he was waiting for the kids to graduate. He told me he was going to move into the apartment with me. I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. And now I find out he was moving money the whole time. He was getting ready. But he wasn't getting ready to leave you. He was getting ready to leave everything. He was going to take the money and disappear. I stood there. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. She was crying and I was standing there with a cart full of groceries, and I didn't feel sorry for her. He had a plan, she said. He had a whole plan. He was going to leave both of us. He was going to take the money and go somewhere else and start over. I don't know where. I don't know when. But I found out. I found out this week. He's been lying to me the whole time. That sounds like the man I married, I said. He doesn't love me. He doesn't love anyone. He's not capable of it. Then you know what kind of man he is. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She was trying to pull herself together. I sent you the photos, she said. I sent you everything. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to leave him. I wanted him to be mine. But he was never going to be mine. He was never going to be anyone's. I looked at her. She was young. She was broken. She was standing in a grocery store crying over a man who'd used her the same way he'd used me. And I felt something I didn't expect. I felt pity. I felt the kind of pity you feel for someone who's just now learning what you've already learned. I'm sorry, I said. I'm sorry he did that to you. She looked at me. She didn't know what to say. Neither did I. I pushed my cart past her and I went to the checkout and I bought my groceries and I drove home. I thought about her standing in that aisle. I thought about how she'd spent 3 years hoping for something that was never going to happen. I thought about how I'd spent 19 years doing the same thing. We were both survivors of the same man. The next week, the federal investigation went public. I saw it on the news. David's firm was under investigation for fraud. Diana was named in the report. She'd been involved in the same case. They'd both been moving money to hide losses. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt numb. It was happening. The thing I'd been told to wait for was finally happening. Barbara called me that evening. She said David had tried to get the separation expedited. He wanted the divorce final quickly. He wanted to minimize the financial exposure. He wanted to protect his assets. He can't, she said. Not now. Not with the investigation. Everything is frozen until the federal prosecutor decides what to do. So what happens next? We wait, she said. We wait and we see what they find. And then we go from there. I sat on the couch and looked at the TV. The news was showing the courthouse, the federal building, the people walking in and out. I saw David's face on the screen. He was walking with his lawyer, his head down, his hands in his pockets. He looked like a man who'd lost everything. I didn't watch for long. I turned off the TV and went to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at the table and looked at the empty chair. The chair where David used to sit. The chair where he told me he wanted to take time apart. The chair where he'd lied to my face and I'd believed him. I thought about the platform. The crowd. Lisa. The way she'd shoved me and I'd caught myself. The way she'd been handcuffed against the wall. I thought about how I'd reported her after seeing the security footage, how I'd known she was the one who'd been mugging women at other stations. I thought about how I'd called the police that morning and how they'd been watching the cameras. I was good at seeing things. I'd always been good at it. I'd seen Lisa's pattern before anyone else had. I'd seen David's pattern too. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. But now I did. Now I believed everything. And I wasn't going to stop believing. I finished my tea and went upstairs. I laid in the middle of the bed and I stared at the ceiling. I didn't think about the future. I didn't think about the past. I thought about right now. I thought about the woman I was becoming. The woman who didn't need anyone else to catch her. The woman who'd already caught herself. The phone rang at 11. It was my daughter. She was crying. She said she'd seen the news. She said she'd talked to David, and he'd told her it was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. She asked me if it was true. I didn't lie to her. Yes, I said. It's true. He's being investigated. He might go to prison. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing. Mom, she said, what are you going to do? I'm going to keep going, I said. I'm going to be fine. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry this happened to you. Don't be, I said. I'm going to be better than fine. I'm going to be someone I can be proud of. She didn't say anything else. She said she loved me and she hung up. I put the phone on the nightstand and I closed my eyes. I was tired. Tired in a way I hadn't been tired in years. Tired of carrying things that weren't mine to carry. Tired of hoping for something that wasn't coming. But I wasn't going to stop. I was going to keep going. I was going to keep being the woman who caught herself. The federal investigation moved fast. I saw it on the news every night. The firm was under scrutiny. David was mentioned in court documents. Diana was mentioned too. They were both named as part of a scheme to hide losses from a major client. The money they'd moved hadn't been for a new life. It had been for covering up a mistake. A mistake that had grown into something much bigger. I didn't follow the details. I didn't want to. I'd already known enough. The rest of it was for the lawyers and the judges and the reporters. I was done with that part of my life. I was already building something new. The house was too big for one person. I'd known that for a while. I'd been living in it for months, sleeping in the bedroom David and I had shared, cooking in the kitchen where I'd made dinner for a man who was having dinner with someone else. I decided to sell it. I listed it with a realtor and I started looking for something smaller. The realtor came by on a Tuesday. She was a woman in her 40s, efficient and kind. She walked through the house and made notes and told me what she thought it would sell for. Are you sure? She asked. This is a lot of house for one person. I'm sure, I said. I don't need all this space. She nodded. She didn't ask about David. She didn't ask why I was selling. She was professional. I appreciated that. The house sold in 2 weeks. I got more than I expected. I used the money to buy a small apartment in the city. It was 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into the living room. It was nothing like the house I'd lived in for 15 years. But it was mine. No one else had ever lived there. No one else had sat at that table or slept in that bed. It was a fresh start. I moved in on a Saturday. The kids came to help. My daughter brought boxes. My son brought a truck. They were both quiet. They didn't ask about David. They didn't ask about the investigation. They just helped me carry things up the stairs and unpack boxes. They stayed for dinner. We ordered pizza and ate it on the floor because I didn't have a table yet. Mom, my daughter said, Are you okay? I'm fine, I said. I'm better than fine. Dad called, she said. He wanted to talk to you. Did you give him my number? No. I told him you'd call if you wanted to. I looked at her. She was 21. She had David's eyes, his stubbornness. But she had my heart. She was trying to take care of me. She'd always try to take care of me. You're a good daughter, I said. I don't want you to be alone, she said. I'm not alone. I have you. I have your brother. I have myself. She didn't say anything. She hugged me. I held her for a long time. Then my son hugged me too. He was taller than David now, broader in the shoulders. He looked like his father, but he didn't move like him. He moved like me. He moved with purpose. I walked them to the door at the end of the night. They drove away together. I stood in the hallway of my new building and I listened to their car fade into the night. Then I went back into my apartment and I closed the door and I looked at the boxes stacked against the walls. I had a whole life to unpack. I had a whole future to arrange. I was going to take my time. The investigation dragged on for months. David was suspended from his firm. He was stripped of his partnership. He was facing charges. I heard all of this from Barbara, who heard it from the federal prosecutor's office. I didn't read the papers. I didn't watch the news. I was living in a world where David didn't exist anymore. He was a ghost. A person I'd once loved. A person I'd once trusted. A person who'd never been real. I started working again. Part-time. A small consultancy that needed someone to review contracts. It wasn't the job I'd had before the kids. It wasn't glamorous. But it was mine. I had something to do. I had people who needed me. I had a reason to get out of bed in the morning. I started walking in the park near my apartment. Every morning. Rain or shine. I walked and I watched people and I thought about nothing. I stopped wearing makeup. I stopped dyeing my hair. I stopped caring about things that hadn't mattered in the first place. I didn't date. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd ever be ready. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt peaceful. I felt like I was finally in the right place, doing the right thing. Barbara called one afternoon in early spring. She said David had been indicted. He was going to trial. He was facing up to 10 years. Diana had already made a deal with the prosecutors. She'd testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. She turned on him. Barbara said. I'm not surprised, I said. He's going to lose everything. The house, the accounts, everything. The court is going to seize it all. I know. I wanted to make sure you were prepared. There's going to be media attention. They might reach out to you. I won't speak to them, I said. That's what I thought. But I wanted to warn you. She gave me the details. The trial was set for the summer. The media would be everywhere. There would be cameras and reporters and people who wanted to tell my story. I told her I didn't care. I told her I was done caring. But I wasn't done. Not really. I thought about David every day. Not with love. Not with anger. With something else. Something that felt like waiting. I was waiting for the end. I was waiting for the trial to be over. I was waiting for the final verdict. I didn't know what I was going to do when it was done. I just knew I needed to see it through. The trial started in June. I didn't go to the courthouse. I watched it on the news like everyone else. David sat in the front row, next to his lawyer. He looked thinner than I remembered. Older. He'd lost something. That thing he'd always had, the thing that made him so sure of himself, was gone. He looked like a man who'd been stripped of everything. Diana testified. She wore a dark suit. She looked younger than I remembered. She looked nervous. She talked about the scheme, about the money, about how David had convinced her to help him. She said she'd loved him. She said she'd believed everything he told her. She said he'd promised her a future. I watched her on the screen and I thought about the woman in the grocery store. The woman who'd cried in the aisle. The woman who'd sent me photos and waited for a man who was never coming. She'd been a fool. She'd been a fool and she'd tried to make me a fool too. But I'd refused. I'd refused to let her pull me into her story. I'd told her I was sorry. I'd meant it. I was sorry for her. I was sorry for anyone who'd ever trusted David. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I spent those days walking in the park, drinking coffee, living my life. I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't obsess. I was past that. I'd moved on. On the third afternoon, Barbara called. She said the verdict had come back. Guilty. On all counts. David was going to prison. I sat in my kitchen. I looked at the phone in my hand. I didn't feel anything. No relief. No satisfaction. No sadness. I felt nothing at all. He's going to be sentenced in 60 days, Barbara said. Okay. Elena, are you okay? I'm fine, I said. I've been waiting for this. I know. But it's still a lot. It's over, I said. It's finally over. I hung up. I went to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting. The sky was pink and orange. I thought about David. I thought about the man I'd married. I thought about the man he'd become. I thought about all the years I'd spent loving him and all the years I'd spent waiting for him to love me back. And then I let it go. I let all of it go. I wasn't a woman who carried the past. I was a woman who'd survived the past. There was a difference. That night, I went to dinner with a friend from the consultancy. We sat at a small Italian restaurant, and I told her about the verdict. She said she was sorry. I told her not to be. I'm free, I said. I'm finally free. She didn't understand. She didn't know what I'd been through. She didn't know about the 4 seasons or the phone calls or the photos. She didn't know about the platforms and the falls and the catches. But I didn't need her to understand. I understood. That was enough. I went home after dinner and I sat in my living room and I started writing letters. I wrote one to my mother. I told her I was okay. I told her I'd done what she'd done. I'd left. I'd walked away from a man who'd never loved me the way I deserved. I told her I was proud of myself. I told her I'd learned her lesson at last. I wrote a letter to Diana. I didn't send it. I just wrote it. I told her I didn't hate her. I told her I'd once been her. I told her she'd made mistakes, but so had I. I told her I was sorry she'd been used the way she'd been used. And I told her I hoped she was okay. I wrote a letter to myself. I told myself I was strong. I told myself I was brave. I told myself I'd survive something that should have destroyed me. And I told myself I was going to be fine. I was always going to be fine. I put the letters in a drawer and I closed the drawer and I went to bed. I slept. I slept without dreaming. I slept without waking. I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with tiredness and everything to do with relief. The next morning, I woke up early. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and I looked at the city waking up. The sun was coming up over the buildings. People were starting their days. They had no idea what I'd been through. They had no idea what I'd survived. That was okay. I wasn't a story. I was a person. A person who'd caught herself on the edge of a platform and kept going. I went to work. I reviewed contracts. I drank coffee. I lived my life. I was doing something important. I was being the person I should have been all along. And I was happy. Not the kind of happy that comes from getting what you want. The kind of happy that comes from knowing you're okay. The kind of happy that comes from surviving the worst and still being able to smile. David was sentenced in August. 8 years. He'd be 60 when he got out. I didn't go to the sentencing. I read about it in the paper. Barbara sent me the details. She said he'd apologized in court. He'd said he was sorry for what he'd done. He'd said he'd been a fool. I didn't believe him. I didn't care if it was true or not. He was sorry. He was a fool. Both could be true. Neither mattered to me. I had a new life now. A small apartment. A part-time job. A morning walk. A schedule that belonged to me. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need to be loved the way I'd been loved before. I needed to love myself. And I did. I loved myself for the first time in a long time. I went to visit the kids on Labor Day weekend. We met at my daughter's apartment. We cooked dinner together. We talked about school and work and life. Nobody mentioned David. Nobody mentioned the trial. We were a family. We were a family who'd survived something hard. And we were still standing. We were still together. After dinner, my daughter took me aside. She said she'd been thinking about what I'd told her on the phone. The night I'd told her I was going to be someone I could be proud of. Are you? She asked. Are you proud of yourself? I looked at her. She was beautiful. She was strong. She was everything I'd ever wanted to be. Yes, I said. I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of all of us. We got through it. We didn't fall apart. We kept going. She hugged me. She held me like I was the most important person in the world. And maybe I was. Maybe I'd always been. I just hadn't known it. I went back to my apartment that night and I sat on the floor in my living room. I spread out all the papers Barbara had sent me. The separation. The divorce. The financial settlement. The proof that I was free. I looked at them and I thought about everything I'd been through. And I smiled. I smiled because I was still here. I was still standing. I was still me. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know where I'd be in a year or 5 years or 10 years. But I didn't need to know. I just needed to be okay. And I was. I was more than okay. I was alive. I was free. I was the woman who caught herself. And I'd never stop. I didn't tell anyone I was going to see him. I didn't tell Barbara. I didn't tell the kids. I didn't tell the friend from the consultancy. I just got in my car one Saturday morning and I drove to the federal prison where he was being held. It was 2 hours away, through farmland and small towns, past billboards for diners and gas stations. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I didn't plan anything. I just went. The prison was a low building made of gray concrete. It looked like a school. It looked like a factory. It had barbed wire on top of the fences and a parking lot full of cars with out-of-state plates. I parked my car and I walked to the front entrance and I told the guard I was there to see an inmate. He asked for my ID. He asked for David's name. He asked if I was on the approved visitors list. I don't know, I said. I haven't visited before. He checked his computer. He said I was on the list. I was surprised. I didn't know David had put me on the list. I didn't know he was expecting me. I sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes. The room was beige. It had plastic chairs bolted to the floor. There were other people waiting. Women with children. Older people. All of them looked tired. All of them looked like they'd been here before. They called my name and I walked through a metal detector and down a hallway. They brought me to a room with glass partitions and telephones. David was already sitting on the other side. He was wearing a gray jumpsuit. He looked thin. He looked old. He looked like a man who'd been broken. I sat down. I picked up the phone. He picked up his. Elena, he said. David. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I. He waited. I waited. The room was quiet. There were other people on other phones, talking to other inmates, but I couldn't hear them. It was just us. I'm sorry, he said. I know it doesn't matter. But I'm sorry for everything. I'm not here for an apology. What are you here for? I looked at him. I'd practiced this conversation in my head 100 times. I'd imagined all the things I was going to say. But sitting there, looking at his face through the glass, I didn't want to say any of them. I just wanted to tell him the truth. I'm here to tell you something, I said. Something I need you to hear. He nodded. He was scared. I could see it in his eyes. He was scared of what I was going to say. Or when my mother died, I said, I was alone. I was sitting in a hospital room holding her hand and she was dying and I called you 3 times and you didn't answer. You were at the Four Seasons. I know that now. I know you were having dinner with Diana. I know you were laughing. I know you were probably talking about me. About how you were going to leave me. About how you were going to start a new life. About how you'd wasted enough time with me. He didn't say anything. He looked down at his hands. When I found out, I thought I was going to die, I said. I thought I was going to fall apart. I thought I was going to be the woman who couldn't survive the truth. But I did survive. I survived because I realized something. I realized that the man I'd loved didn't exist. He was a fiction. A character I'd invented. And the real man, the man who was at the Four Seasons that night, was a stranger. I'd never known him. I'd never loved him. I'd loved someone else. Someone who wasn't real. Elena, let me finish. He stopped. He looked at me. He looked like a child. He looked like a boy who'd been caught stealing. I didn't come here to make you feel bad, I said. I didn't come here to make you feel anything. I came here to tell you that I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sad. I'm not anything. You're a person I used to know. That's all. You're a person I used to know and I'm saying goodbye. He was crying. I could see the tears on his face. I didn't care. I didn't feel bad for him. I didn't feel anything at all. I spent 19 years with you, I said. I gave you 19 years of my life. I gave you my time and my energy and my love. I gave you children. I gave you a home. I gave you everything I had. And you gave me nothing. You gave me lies. You gave me secrets. You gave me a version of yourself that was designed to keep me in place. You didn't love me. You didn't even see me. I was furniture to you. I was a fixture. I was something you could use and discard when you were done. That's not true, he said. It is true. You know it's true. You've known it for years. You just didn't want to admit it. You wanted to think of yourself as a good man. A man who'd made mistakes. A man who'd been confused. But you weren't confused. You were selfish. You were selfish, and you hurt everyone around you, and you never once stopped to think about what you were doing. He was sobbing. I watched him through the glass. He was a man who'd lost everything. He'd lost his career, his reputation, his freedom. He'd lost his family. He'd lost himself. And I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt sorry for the person I used to be. The person who'd loved him. The person who'd trusted him. The person who'd believed he was better than he was. David, I said, I'm not coming back. I'm not going to write you letters. I'm not going to visit you. I'm not going to be part of your life anymore. We're done. We've been done for a long time. I just didn't know it. I know, he said. I know I don't deserve anything from you. You don't. But I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to tell you the truth. That's all I've ever wanted. The truth. And now I have it. And now I'm free. He didn't say anything else. He was crying too hard to speak. I put the phone down. I stood up. I walked to the door and I knocked and the guard let me out. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see his face again. I'd seen enough of his face for a lifetime. I walked out of the prison and into the parking lot. The sun was high. The air was warm. I got in my car and I started the engine and I drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't think about what I'd just done. I just drove. I drove through the farmland and the small towns and the billboards for diners and gas stations. I drove back to my life. I stopped at a rest stop on the way home. I bought a coffee and a sandwich and I sat at a picnic table in the parking lot. There were families there. Kids running around. Dogs on leashes. Everyone was normal. Everyone was doing normal things. I was normal too. I was just a woman eating a sandwich at a rest stop. No one knew what I'd just done. No one knew where I'd been. And that was okay. I didn't need anyone to know. I knew. That was enough. I finished my sandwich and I threw the wrapper in the trash and I got back in my car. I drove home. I walked up the stairs to my apartment and I opened the door and I stood in the middle of the living room. It was quiet. It was empty. It was mine. I sat on the floor and I closed my eyes and I breathed. I had done something hard. I had sat across from the man who'd hurt me and I had told him the truth. I had said goodbye. I had closed the door. And now I was ready. Ready for whatever came next. The next day, I went back to work. I reviewed contracts. I drank coffee. I talked to clients. I was good at my job. I was good at being myself. I was good at being the woman I'd become. A week later, I got a letter from David. It was addressed to my apartment. I opened it and read it in the kitchen. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been thinking about what I'd said. He said he'd been a fool. He said he'd loved me. He said he'd always loved me. He said he hoped I could forgive him. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and put it in the drawer with the other letters. The letters I'd written to my mother and Diana and myself. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I'd already said everything I needed to say. I didn't think about him after that. I thought about other things. I thought about the kids. I thought about my job. I thought about the park where I walked in the mornings. I thought about the small things that made up a life. And I was happy. I was happy in a way I hadn't been happy in years. I was happy because I'd chosen myself. I was happy because I'd stopped waiting for someone else to choose me. The divorce was finalized in October. I didn't have to be there. Barbara handled everything. She sent me the papers to sign and I signed them and I mailed them back. It was over. 19 years of marriage, for years of lies, and now it was just a piece of paper. A piece of paper that said I was free. I celebrated by doing nothing. I stayed home. I made myself a nice dinner and I opened a bottle of wine and I sat in my living room and I watched the sunset. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell anyone. It was just me and the wine and the last of the light. My daughter called the next morning. She'd heard from David's lawyer that the divorce was final. She asked how I was doing. I'm fine, I said. I'm more than fine. Mom, you can be sad. It's okay to be sad. I'm not sad. I'm relieved. I'm grateful. I'm a lot of things. But sad isn't one of them. She was quiet for a minute. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I think I understand, she said. I think I finally understand what you went through. Maybe you do, I said. But you don't have to understand. You just have to be you. You have to live your life the way you want to live it. I don't want to make the same mistakes you made. You won't, I said. Because you know something I didn't know. You know that you're worth more than the way someone treats you. She cried a little. I let her. I told her I loved her and I hung up and I went to work. The weeks passed. I got into a routine. Wake up, coffee, walk in the park, work, dinner, read, sleep. It was simple. It was quiet. It was everything I needed. I didn't miss the old life. I didn't miss the big house or the nice car or the husband who'd never been there. I missed the person I used to think I was. But I'd found a new person. A better person. A person who knew her own worth. One morning, I ran into Diana in the park. She was walking a dog. A small brown dog with floppy ears. She looked different. Healthier. She was wearing workout clothes and her hair was pulled back and she looked like someone who'd been through something and come out the other side. She saw me before I saw her. She stopped. I stopped. We looked at each other. Elena, she said. Diana. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to see you either. She smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was a nervous smile. A smile that said she wasn't sure what was going to happen next. I live nearby, she said. I moved here after the trial. I needed a fresh start. Me too, I said. We stood there. The dog was sniffing the ground. People were walking past us on the path. It was a normal morning in a normal park and two women who'd loved the same man were standing there looking at each other. I want to apologize, she said. For the photos. For the messages. For everything I did. It was wrong. I was trying to hurt you and I was wrong. You were trying to hurt me, I said. But you didn't. You helped me. You gave me the information I needed. She shook her head. I didn't mean to help you. I meant to destroy you. I know. But you didn't. You gave me the truth. And the truth set me free. She didn't know what to say. I didn't blame her. I didn't know what to say either. We were strangers who'd been enemies. We were strangers who'd been victims of the same man. I'm sorry for what he did to you, I said. I'm sorry for what he did to both of us. He didn't do anything to me, she said. I did it to myself. I chose to believe him. I chose to stay. I knew what he was capable of and I stayed anyway. That's what I did too. She looked at me. There were tears in her eyes. She didn't let them fall. I hope you're happy, she said. I am, I said. I hope you're happy too. She nodded. She walked away. I watched her go. She was just a woman in a park walking a dog. She wasn't my enemy. She wasn't my friend. She was someone I'd known in another life. And now I was going to forget her. I continued my walk. I thought about the platform. The crowd. Lisa. The way she'd pushed me and I'd caught myself. I thought about how I'd been standing there, just standing there, and someone had tried to destroy me. And I'd survived. I'd survived because I was strong. I'd survived because I'd always been strong. I just hadn't known it. I walked back to my apartment and I made coffee and I sat at the kitchen window and I watched the city. There was a new building going up across the street. Cranes and workers and noise. It was progress. It was change. It was what I was doing with my life. Barbara called later that week. She said David had appealed his conviction. She said it wasn't likely to succeed, but it would drag things out. She said I didn't have to worry about it. It didn't affect me. His lawyers might try to contact you, she said. They might want you to testify on his behalf. Character evidence. They won't, I said. I have nothing good to say. I know. But I wanted to warn you. They won't contact me, I said. David knows better. She didn't argue. She said she'd handle it if anything came up. I thanked her and I hung up and I went back to my life. The holidays came. I spent Thanksgiving with the kids. We went to my daughter's apartment. We cooked a turkey. We talked about school and work and the future. Nobody mentioned David. He was gone. He was a memory. A memory we were all trying to forget. On Christmas, I went to my son's apartment. He had a girlfriend now. A nice girl with a kind smile. They served dinner and we exchanged gifts and we laughed. It was a good day. A good day and a good life. I didn't go to the prison. I didn't send a card. I didn't call. There was nothing to say. I'd said everything I needed to say. The new year came. I didn't make resolutions. I didn't believe in them. But I made a promise to myself. A promise that I would never be the person I was before. I would never let anyone tell me I wasn't enough. I would never give up my life for someone else's dream. I would never forget what I'd learned. I learned that I was strong. I learned that I was brave. I learned that I could survive anything. And I learned that the only person I needed to save me was myself. I kept walking. I kept working. I kept living. Every day was a new day. Every day was a chance to be the person I wanted to be. The appeal was denied in February. David was going to serve his full sentence. I heard about it on the news. I didn't feel anything. I turned off the TV, and I went to bed. I dreamed about the platform that night. I dreamed I was standing there, holding my phone, and Lisa was behind me. I felt her hand on my back. I felt the shove. I went flying toward the tracks. And then I caught myself. I caught myself on the pillar and I stood up and I was fine. My purse was gone. But I was fine. I was standing on my own 2 feet. I woke up in the morning and I went to the park and I walked. The sun was coming up. The air was cold. I was alive. I was alive and I was free and nothing else mattered. I went back to the station on a Thursday. It was almost a year since it happened. I didn't plan it. I was coming home from a meeting downtown and the train I needed was delayed. The announcement came over the speakers and everyone groaned and shifted their weight. I looked at the platform map on the wall and I saw that the green line was running. The line where it happened. I walked down the stairs and I got on the Green Line train and I rode it to the station. It looked the same. Same yellow tile. Same metal pillars. Same digital signs listing arrival times. The crowd was thinner than I remembered. It was early afternoon, not rush hour. A few people were standing near the edge, looking down at their phones. Nobody was pushing. Nobody was shoving. Everything was ordinary. I walked to the spot where I'd fallen. I could picture it. The pillar with the scratch from my palm. The edge where my purse had gone over. The place where Lisa had stood behind me. I stood there for a minute and I looked at the tracks. The train wasn't coming. There was nothing down there but concrete and dust and the faint smell of brakes. I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel sad. I felt like I'd come to close something. A loop. A circle. The place where I'd almost fallen was the place where I'd started learning the truth. It was the beginning. And now I was at the end. A security guard came over. He was young, maybe 25. He had a kind face. Ma'am, are you okay? He asked. I'm fine, I said. Are you waiting for the train? No. I'm just standing. He looked at me like he didn't understand. I didn't explain. I just stood there for another minute. Then I turned and walked away. I walked up the stairs and out of the station and into the daylight. I was done. I was done with the station. I was done with the platform. I was done with all of it. I went home and I made a decision. I was going to leave the city. I didn't know where yet. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere I could start over without the weight of everything that had happened. I'd saved enough money. I had the money from the house. I had my mother's inheritance. I had my job, which I could do remotely. I had no reason to stay. I called the kids and told them. My daughter cried. My son was quiet. But they both understood. They both knew I needed to go. Or where will you go? My daughter asked. I don't know yet. Somewhere by the water. Somewhere with trees. Will you visit? Of course. I'll visit all the time. And you'll visit me. Promise, promise. I started packing. It didn't take long. I didn't have much. A few boxes of books. Some clothes. The photographs I'd kept. The letters I'd written and never sent. I put everything in boxes and I labeled them and I stacked them by the door. On my last night in the apartment, I sat on the floor in the living room and I opened the drawer where I'd kept the letters. My mother's letters. Diana's letter. My letter to myself. I took them out and I read them one more time. My mother's letters were drafts. Fragments. Sentences she'd started and never finished. She'd been trying to say something she couldn't say. She'd been trying to tell me what I need to know. And now I knew it. I didn't need the letters anymore. Diana's letter was short. I'd written it in a moment of pity. I didn't need it anymore either. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. We were both okay. We'd both survived. My letter to myself was the longest. I'd written it the night after David was sentenced. I'd been tired. I'd been raw. I'd been everything. I read it now and I felt like I was reading the words of a stranger. A woman who'd been through something terrible and who'd come out the other side. I didn't need the letter anymore. I'd lived it. I'd become it. I put all the letters back in the drawer. I left them there. The next tenant could find them or not. It didn't matter. They were words on paper. They weren't my life. My life was somewhere else. My life was what I was going to build. I left the next morning. I didn't take much. A suitcase. A box of books. The small things I couldn't part with. I drove out of the city on the highway, past the signs for the airport, past the exits for the suburbs. I drove until I hit the coast. I found a small town with a main street and a grocery store and a diner. I found a house with a porch. It was small. It was old. It had a view of the water. I bought it. I moved in a week later. I painted the walls. I put my books on the shelves. I bought a new table and new chairs. I made it mine. Every room was something I'd chosen. Every corner was something I'd decided. There was nothing in that house that reminded me of him. I started walking on the beach every morning. The water was gray and cold. The wind was sharp. But I loved it. I loved the sound of the waves. I loved the smell of the salt. I loved the feeling of being small against something so big. I walked for miles. I walked until I couldn't walk anymore. And then I went home and I made coffee and I sat on my porch and I watched the world go by. The kids came to visit in the summer. They brought their friends. We sat on the beach. We grilled food. We played cards. We laughed. It was the best time I'd had in years. It was the best time I'd had maybe ever. My daughter asked me if I was lonely. I told her no. I told her I was never alone. I had the water. I had the wind. I had the sound of the waves. I had myself. And that was enough. I never thought you'd be okay, she said. When I found out what happened, I thought you were going to break. Maybe I did break, I said. But I put myself back together. How did you do it? I thought about it. I thought about the platform. The crowd. Lisa. The way I'd caught myself. I thought about the call. The receipt. The letters. The lawyers. The trial. I thought about all of it. I stopped waiting, I said. I stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. I stopped waiting for someone else to see me. I stopped waiting for someone else to choose me. I chose myself. She nodded. She understood. I could see it in her face. She understood. We stayed on the porch until the sun went down. We watched the sky turn orange and pink and purple. We watched the stars come out. We talked about nothing. We talked about everything. We were a family. A family that had survived. That night, I went to bed early. I lay in the dark and I listened to the waves. The sound was steady and constant. It was the sound of something that didn't need anyone to survive. It was the sound of the world going on. I closed my eyes and I let myself fall asleep. I didn't dream. I didn't need to. I was living the life I'd always wanted. A life I'd built myself. A life I was proud of. I went to see Diana one last time before I left. I know I said I'd forget her, but I didn't. Not completely. I went to her apartment in the city and I knocked on the door and she opened it. She was wearing a sweater and she had her hair pulled back. She looked older. She looked like she'd learned something too. Elena, she said. I'm leaving the city, I said. I wanted to say goodbye. Where are you going? A small town. By the water. She nodded. She didn't invite me in. I didn't expect her to. I think about you sometimes, she said. Not in a weird way. I just think about what you said in the park. About the truth setting you free. I think about it a lot. Good, I said. I'm glad. I'm sorry for everything. For all of it. I looked at her. She was a woman who'd been broken and who'd put herself back together. Just like me. We were different, but we were the same. We were survivors. I forgive you, I said. I forgive you, and I hope you forgive yourself. She started crying. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt something else. I felt peace. I walked away from her apartment, and I walked to my car, and I drove out of the city. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I was done with the city. I was done with the past. I was done with all of it. Now I live by the water. I have a porch and a view and a life I built myself. I see the kids when they come. I walk on the beach every morning. I drink coffee and I watch the waves. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm not hoping for anything. I'm just living. I'm just being. Sometimes I think about the platform. The crowd. Lisa. The way she pushed me and I caught myself. I think about how close I came to falling. I think about how I didn't. I think about how I got up and I kept going. That's what I do. I get up and I keep going. It's not a secret. It's not a strategy. It's just what I learned. You catch yourself or you don't. I caught myself. And I never stopped. I'm never going to stop. I'm going to keep catching myself for the rest of my life.